Hello, my name is Apple and welcome to Apple Story Channel. Today I will take you into the world of criminal investigations where real cases sound more unbelievable than any movie script. These are facts you might struggle to believe, yet every single one is true. Imagine a murder case where the key witness was not a human but a parrot. In Michigan, a man was killed in his home, and investigators had almost no leads. But the victim's pet parrot kept repeating the phrase "don't shoot." Detectives noticed it and connected the dots. Eventually, this strange clue became part of the evidence used in court to support the charges. The idea that a parrot could echo the last words of a victim and help detectives solve a case still shocks many people in law enforcement. Then there is the case of a woman in Canada who was poisoned with a drink. The crime would have remained unsolved, but the victim had written a diary every single day of her life. Police discovered her final entries, describing the unusual taste in her drink and how sick she was feeling. That diary, written in her own hand, was enough to guide detectives toward the killer. It is haunting to think that her habit of journaling became her voice after death. Another fact that always surprises people comes from Britain. In one investigation, detectives were baffled by a series of robberies. The breakthrough came not from fingerprints or DNA but from a potato. The criminals had used potatoes as silencers on their weapons, and tiny fragments of potato skin were left at the crime scene. Forensic scientists managed to prove the connection between those fragments and the suspect's kitchen. Imagine being caught for murder because of a potato. But one of the most chilling stories is about a cold case solved through genealogy. A woman in California was murdered in the 1980s, and for decades no one knew who did it. Years later, detectives uploaded the killer's DNA profile into an online genealogy database. They traced the genetic links through distant relatives until they identified the suspect. The man had lived freely for over 30 years. What makes this terrifying is that the same method has since identified dozens of hidden killers, proving that even family trees can turn into evidence. And then there is the bizarre case from Austria where investigators solved a hit-and-run thanks to a frozen insect. Police found a crushed mosquito inside the suspect's car. They tested the blood inside the insect and discovered it belonged to the victim. That single mosquito became the witness that no one could deny. The deeper we go into these cases, the stranger it gets. A jar of peanut butter once became evidence in a fraud case because the criminal had left fingerprints on the lid while switching price tags. A single cat hair helped convict a killer when forensic science proved it matched the victim's pet. A bite mark on a sandwich abandoned at the scene revealed the identity of a burglar through DNA. These are not legends or rumors. They are part of the documented history of criminal investigations. Real detectives, real criminals, and real evidence so unusual it sounds unreal. Every one of these cases reminds us that in the world of crime, the smallest detail can turn into the loudest truth. Then let's go further. I am Apple, and this is Apple Story Channel. What I am about to share are real cases where the most unexpected details became the key that cracked criminal investigations wide open. In Germany, a killer was finally caught because of a half-eaten sausage. At the crime scene, investigators discovered a piece of salami that the suspect had bitten. Years later, when DNA databases became more advanced, that tiny bite mark led directly to the suspect. Imagine thinking you left no trace behind, only to be betrayed by your lunch. One of the strangest cases comes from Finland, where a hit-and-run seemed unsolvable. No witnesses, no cameras, just a damaged car abandoned nearby. But forensic experts found a tiny pollen sample stuck inside the vehicle. That pollen matched the exact species of plant growing near the crime scene. It was enough to prove the car had been there at the time of the accident. Plants, something we walk past every day, became the silent witnesses of murder. In the United States, a man was convicted because of an unusual clue: glitter. A woman had gone missing, and investigators searched the suspect's truck. They found traces of glitter stuck in the carpet fibers. That glitter matched a craft project the victim had been working on before she disappeared. The sparkling fragments, nearly impossible to clean up, linked the suspect directly to her. A tiny speck of glitter held the weight of truth in a courtroom. Then there is the story of the tree that testified. In Arizona, a man was killed near a mesquite tree, and the only real clue was seed pods scattered on his truck. Botanists studied the DNA of those seeds and proved they came from the exact tree near the crime scene. For the first time in history, plant DNA was used in a murder trial. Nature itself became the witness. Another shocking case happened in the UK, where investigators solved a kidnapping because of a vacuum cleaner bag. Inside the dust, they found tiny fibers and particles that revealed the exact route the suspect had traveled with the victim. Forensic scientists could reconstruct his path through microscopic dirt, dust, and fibers. It shows how every step leaves a trail even if we don't see it. Even technology creates bizarre forms of evidence. In Arkansas, detectives used data from a man's smart water meter to prove his involvement in a crime. The meter showed a massive spike in water usage in the middle of the night, which investigators believed was him cleaning up a murder scene. Machines designed to measure our daily habits can sometimes betray the darkest secrets. The strangest part is that sometimes criminals are caught because of their own arrogance. In one case, a man who committed a double murder posted a review online for a knife he had purchased. The review was titled "Perfect for Slicing." That review was later found by detectives and tied to the exact weapon used in the crime. It was his own words that turned against him. And perhaps one of the most chilling cases comes from Florida, where a cold-blooded killer was caught decades later thanks to insect science. Investigators studied the maggots found on the victim's body, and by analyzing their growth stage, they were able to establish the exact time of death. This precision allowed them to eliminate false alibis and finally pin the crime on the suspect. Even flies, often ignored, can reveal the truth in the hands of forensic experts. Every one of these stories shows that no matter how careful a criminal is, the world around them records the truth in ways they cannot imagine. In Oklahoma, police solved a murder with the help of a Fitbit. A woman was found dead in her home, and her husband claimed she was killed by an intruder. But investigators checked her fitness tracker. The device showed her heartbeat spiking and then stopping at a time that did not match his story. The husband's timeline collapsed instantly. A simple wristband exposed the truth. Then there is the case of the Google search killer. In New York, detectives investigating a disappearance checked the suspect's computer. They found searches like "how to make a body disappear" and "how long before a body smells." His internet history was presented in court as evidence, and it destroyed any hope of innocence. The web browser became the witness that never forgets. One of the most bizarre pieces of evidence ever used in court came from snow. In Illinois, a man was accused of murder, but there were no witnesses. What convicted him was the footprint trail in the snow outside the victim's home. Investigators followed the prints straight to his house. Even more shocking, the pattern of wear on his shoes perfectly matched the tracks in the snow. The winter cold recorded his guilt. There is also the disturbing case from California where a killer was caught because of a pizza crust. At first, detectives had nothing, no fingerprints, no weapon. But while reviewing security footage, they saw the suspect order pizza at the scene. He threw the crust in the trash. Investigators retrieved it, tested the saliva, and matched the DNA. That crust sealed his fate in court. In Ohio, police cracked a robbery using soil. The suspect's car had dirt stuck under the bumper, and forensic scientists compared it to the soil from the crime scene. The match was exact, down to the mineral composition. Dirt, something people wipe off without thought, became as powerful as a fingerprint. Then there's the chilling case from India where a man tried to poison his wife, and her final clue was on her phone. Before collapsing, she used voice-to-text to name her killer. Her unfinished sentence, recorded automatically, became admissible evidence. Even her fading voice was enough to prove the crime. Another real case that shocks people is from Texas. A man denied killing his neighbor, but his dog betrayed him. Detectives noticed blood on the dog's fur. Testing revealed it belonged to the victim. The animal had unknowingly carried the evidence back home. In this story, the pet was not just a companion but the silent witness to murder. And then there's one of the strangest investigations in modern history. In Pennsylvania, a woman's death was solved with help from her smart speaker. The device had recorded sounds of a struggle and was later accessed by investigators. The recording didn't just confirm she had been attacked, it picked up the killer's voice. The home assistant meant for convenience became the most unexpected surveillance tool. Every one of these cases proves a disturbing reality: in the world of crime, the truth is never really hidden. The smallest trace, the tiniest habit, even the technology in your pocket, can turn into a witness that never lies. In Connecticut, a husband tried to claim that his wife's murder was a tragic accident. But investigators checked her Fitbit, and the data showed she had been walking around hours after the time he claimed she died. That single inconsistency shattered his alibi. A simple step counter destroyed a carefully built lie. In another case from Massachusetts, detectives used a vacuum cleaner bag to solve a brutal killing. Inside the bag were tiny specks of human tissue and blood. When analyzed, the samples matched the victim. The killer had tried to clean up the scene but had unknowingly stored the evidence in his own home. The machine meant for cleaning became a time capsule of guilt. One of the most surreal cases happened in Florida, where a man was accused of arson. Investigators discovered that the fire's origin matched the exact place where his dog's paw prints were found in the ash. More disturbing, traces of gasoline were stuck to the animal's fur. The dog had unknowingly walked through the crime and carried evidence straight to investigators. There is also the case of the unlucky lottery winner. In Georgia, a woman who had recently won a large prize was found dead. Detectives noticed something odd: her killer had searched her trash before the crime. The breakthrough came when investigators found a discarded lottery ticket with his fingerprints on it. That one slip of greed linked him directly to her murder. Another shocking fact comes from California, where a single strand of hair became the key to justice. The hair was not human, it belonged to a dog. Forensic experts proved it matched the victim's pet, and that strand placed the suspect inside her home. It was the first time pet hair had been used to convict someone of murder in the United States. One bizarre case from Japan was solved with a cup of instant noodles. Police investigating a stabbing found a noodle cup at the scene. On the lid, there was saliva from the suspect who had licked it before eating. That DNA sample was enough to identify and arrest him. A cheap meal had carried the truth. In England, a burglar thought he was clever by breaking into a bakery at night. But he made a fatal mistake: he helped himself to a piece of cake. Investigators found bite marks, and forensic dentistry proved they matched his teeth perfectly. His sweet tooth betrayed him in court. Perhaps one of the darkest but most fascinating cases comes from Belgium, where investigators solved a double murder thanks to insect science. By studying the exact stage of beetle larvae found on the bodies, they reconstructed not only the time of death but also the movement of the corpses after the killings. Bugs revealed a timeline no human witness could provide. And then there is the story from the United States where detectives solved a homicide through a pacemaker. The suspect claimed the victim died naturally, but doctors downloaded the data from the pacemaker. The heart's rhythm showed impossible patterns, proving that she had been attacked. Medical devices built to save lives had also become instruments of truth. Each of these cases shows one lesson: criminals cannot imagine how the smallest detail can become their downfall. Whether it is a hair, a dog, a diary, or even a piece of food, justice hides in places no one expects. In California, detectives once cracked a homicide because of a pocket dial. A man murdered his business partner, but during the act, his phone accidentally called a relative. The entire muffled conversation, including the sounds of the attack, was recorded on voicemail. That unintentional call became the evidence that put him behind bars. One of the most chilling cases came from Ohio. A woman was murdered in her home, and investigators found a voice message left on her answering machine. When they played it back, they heard her struggling, followed by an unfamiliar male voice. It wasn't just circumstantial. Experts compared the voice with the suspect's and proved it was him. Technology meant for communication became the echo of her final moments. There was also a bizarre case in New Zealand where detectives solved a crime because of lip balm. At a burglary scene, investigators discovered a glass with a faint oily print on the rim. Forensic experts realized it wasn't a fingerprint but the chemical trace of lip balm. That tiny residue contained enough DNA to identify the thief. A beauty product left on the lips betrayed him. In Texas, a man was finally convicted for murder after more than 20 years of freedom, thanks to chewing gum. He had chewed it and stuck it under a table near the crime scene. When investigators reopened the case, they tested the dried gum and extracted his DNA. Something as careless as spitting out gum turned into his downfall decades later. Another extraordinary case happened in Canada. Police investigating an assault had almost no leads until they examined the suspect's shoelaces. Traces of blood hidden in the fabric matched the victim. The criminal had cleaned his shoes but forgot the laces. That small detail, invisible to the naked eye, carried the truth straight into court. In Florida, detectives used smart home data to solve a brutal crime. The suspect claimed he was asleep during the murder, but the home's digital thermostat showed sudden, unexplained temperature changes during the time of death. Someone had been moving through the house. Even the heating system told the story of guilt. One of the strangest investigations took place in France, where police solved a case using pollen once again. Investigators found grains of pollen stuck to the suspect's clothing, and those grains were unique to a rare plant growing only near the victim's burial site. The killer had unknowingly carried nature's fingerprint back home. Perhaps one of the most unsettling facts comes from California, where a woman's murder was solved using her own smartwatch. The device didn't just record her movements, it captured her heartbeat, showing the exact moment it spiked and then suddenly stopped. When investigators compared this with the suspect's alibi, the lies collapsed instantly. Her own heartbeat testified against her killer. And then there's the case in the UK where a single droplet of sweat solved a murder. The killer left no fingerprints, no hair, no blood, but forensic experts found sweat absorbed into the collar of the victim's shirt. Inside that tiny droplet was enough DNA to convict. Something invisible to the eye became the loudest truth in court. Again and again, these cases remind us, in the world of crime, nothing is too small, too random, or too invisible. Every move leaves a mark, and sooner or later, that mark speaks louder than any words. In Michigan, a killer was caught because of a shopping receipt. Investigators found a crumpled receipt near the victim's body that showed the purchase of a specific brand of gloves and bleach just hours before the murder. Detectives tracked the store's security footage and saw the suspect making that exact purchase. A forgotten piece of paper, worth less than a cent, carried the truth. In Arizona, a man tried to claim innocence in a deadly shooting. But investigators noticed something odd. The bullets used in the crime were traced to a very specific box of ammunition. That box had been manufactured in a tiny batch and sold only to a few stores. Eventually, police tracked it down to the suspect's home. Even a bullet can have a fingerprint when science looks close enough. One of the strangest murder cases in Italy was solved because of chewing tobacco spit. At the crime scene, police found a dark stain on the pavement. Forensic analysis showed it wasn't blood, it was tobacco spit. Inside, there was enough DNA to identify the killer. A disgusting habit turned into the evidence he could never deny. In the UK, investigators solved a case thanks to the reflection in a victim's eyes. A hostage photo had been taken, and detectives zoomed in on the victim's pupils. In the reflection, they saw part of the kidnapper's face and room layout. This clue helped track the location and rescue the victim. Human eyes had turned into living mirrors. In Oregon, a burglar was caught because of a single drop of sweat. The man broke into a house and thought he left no trace. But forensic teams swabbed the glass surface where he had leaned. Hidden under special light, they found sweat proteins. That microscopic clue carried enough DNA to convict him. Another bizarre story comes from Australia. Detectives solved an attempted murder using Google Maps. The suspect claimed he had never been near the crime scene. But his phone's location history showed a Google Maps route leading directly there at the exact time of the crime. The navigation app had tracked his every move, silently recording his guilt. Then there is the chilling story from California where a man's pacemaker betrayed him. He claimed he had been asleep while his house caught fire. But investigators checked the data from his pacemaker and saw his heart rate spiking at the exact time he was supposedly in bed. He had been running around setting the fire. His own heart became a witness against him. Perhaps one of the darkest cases comes from Scotland, where police solved a murder because of soil under a fingernail. The killer had tried to bury the body, but a small amount of soil stuck beneath the victim's fingernail was traced back to the exact burial site. Even in death, the victim had carried the final clue to expose the truth. And then there's a case from Texas where investigators solved the crime using a fitness app. The suspect had claimed he was asleep during the night of the murder. But his running app showed him jogging in the woods near the crime scene at the exact time the killing happened. The app that counted his miles counted his guilt as well. Every one of these real stories proves something chilling: criminals don't just fight detectives, they fight against the world itself. Technology, nature, even the smallest accident leaves behind a voice that never lies. I am Apple, and this is Apple Story Channel. You've now walked with me through some of the most unbelievable true investigations where justice was delivered not by witnesses in the usual sense, but by parrots, pacemakers, pollen, pizza crusts, and even a mosquito. Every one of these cases teaches us a chilling truth: there is no such thing as a perfect crime. The smallest trace, the tiniest mistake, or the technology we live with every day can become a silent witness. Whether it's dirt under a fingernail, a smartwatch recording a heartbeat, or even glitter stuck to fabric, the truth has a way of surfacing. Criminals may think they are clever, but the world records their actions in ways they can't control. Nature, science, and technology combine to bring justice, and history proves it again and again. Thank you for joining me on this journey. I am Apple, and this was Apple Story Channel. Until the next story, remember, the truth always leaves a mark.